Good morning. Welcome to the ICSS Sunday morning program at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library. My name is Raj Sahai. The acronym ICSS stands for the Institute for Critical Study of Society, which was formed at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library in 2004 to preserve Marx's heritage and to support the struggle for social justice and the struggle for socialism leading to communism. The opinions expressed in our forum are those of its authors. We in the ICS, however, are united in our belief that Marx's work remains relevant, who in his 11th thesis on Feuerbach said, "The philosophers have interpreted the world in different ways. The point, however, is to change it." Our speaker, Comrade Harpal Brar, has followed that thesis of Marx. He was a founding member of Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, known by its acronym CPGB-ML. CPGB-ML was formed in 2004 after some of its members split from Socialist Labour Party, which itself was a party that split from the Labour Party. The CPGB-ML opposes Trotskyism, social democracy, democratic socialism, and all revisionist parties. In 1995, Harpal Brar published a book titled Social Democracy, the Enemy Within. And since then, and in fact, since before then, 1992 onwards, he has written a number of books and pamphlets. I will put those in the chat for you, so I will not list all of them. Adopting positions maintained by Harpal Brar and his comrades since 1960s, the CPGB-ML has been vigorously opposed to all those who work with or in any way endorse the Labour Party. CPGB-ML opposes opportunism in the working class movement and works for the establishment of socialism in United Kingdom, or Britain as it used to be known. At the 8th Congress of CPGB-ML in September 2018, Harpal Brar announced that he would step down as chair of the party, and he's been replaced by Ella Rue. Since he has written many books, I'll list a few. Perestroika, The Complete Collapse of Revisionism is one, 1992. Revisionism and Demise of the USSR. Trotskyism or Leninism, 1993. Social Democracy, The Enemy Within. NATO's Predatory War Against Yugoslavia. Imperialism and War. Imperialism, The Eve of Social Revolution of the Proletariat, and other books. And the latest book, as far as I know, is Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, which was published in 2020. A subject of much debate among Marxists and of great interest also to our audience.
No, this is what it
his
is.
His talk today is on his latest book, Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, which is a subject of much debate among Marxists. After the talk, we will have, as usual, a brief intermission for announcements and then a question and answer session. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, organizer, activist, and author, Comrade Harpal Brar.
Thank you, Comrade Sai. Thank you, and thank you, Comrade Allen, and the ICSS for this kind invitation. I'm very pleased to be with you. So I shall make a brief presentation of what really my book is about and what I am committed to maintaining as not only my policy, but the policy of the CPGB-ML. Ever since capitalism became a dominant system of production in the really late 18th, 19th century, it has been the endeavor of the bourgeoisie of Britain and subsequently of all the capitalist countries to kill in the working class faith in its own strength, faith in the possibility and inevitability of its victory, and thus to perpetuate capitalist slavery. If the bourgeoisie find that capitalism is still around, it's not because of the merits of capitalism, it is because of the weakness of the working class. And we can't say that the bourgeoisie hasn't been successful in injecting the venom of skepticism in the minds of working people, making them think that they really can't get rid of capitalism, and if they got rid of it, they wouldn't be any better. And in this regard, the field of economics has been one of the most important areas where the bourgeoisie tries to fight against the working class. It has been the position of bourgeois economists, who really basically, after Ricardo, are no more than propagandists for the bourgeoisie. They do not do any scientific research. They do not have any insights into the system, basically because the future of capitalism, the past, and therefore there's no future, and they are simply propagandists. And what they try and do is to say that outside of capitalism, there is no salvation for people, because it's only under capitalist system of competition, anarchic production, that it's possible to have proper functioning economy and have proper calculation, which reflects price. Price of production. And also they say, under socialism, which aims to get rid of the market, the producers of wealth, which to them really are the capitalists, there's no incentive for producing because they wish to destroy. Well, ever since capitalism became the dominant system of production in the 19th century, of course, along with it becoming the dominant system of production, it brought in its wake a working class which increasingly became powerful. And of course, capitalists were terrified that the sleeping giant might wake up and might get rid of the whole system. So it has been the endeavor of the bourgeoisie ever since then to actually kill in the working class faith in its own strength and faith in the possibility and inevitability of its victory. And so it's been, it has to be admitted, sadly, been quite successful in instilling the venom of skepticism into the working class movement. So if capitalism has survived so long, it isn't because of its own merits, considering that there are recurring crises of capitalism every 8 to 10 years there used to be, but these days there's a permanent crisis of overproduction and wars all over the place, including 2 world wars, which claimed the lives of 100 million people and destroyed untold amounts of wealth created by humanity. It has been there, not because of its merits, but because the working class did not necessarily have faith in its own abilities to put an end to it. The Bolsheviks, around about 1917, were the first to break through that system. And as Stalin said at the 18th Party Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, he said that if our program of construction and rebuilding the Soviet economy instills in the working class in the capitalist countries the faith in itself and its ability to destroy the old and bring into existence the new socialist system, then our efforts in this regard would not be in vain. And he assured his audiences that they will not be in vain. Now, as far as capitalism is concerned, under this system, commodity production becomes dominant. Commodity production has a long history. It did not arrive with capitalism. It was there under the slave system. It was there under the period of serfdom, feudalism. It only became the dominant system of production under capitalism. And the thing about commodity production is that products are made not for use by the people who produce, but for exchange to be sold in the market. Now, capitalism brings in its wake a tremendous growth in the productivity of labor. In fact, that is the historical function of capitalism, to increase the productivity of labor. As compared with feudalism and previous systems, its achievements in this field were genuinely colossal. However, capitalism constantly impoverishes the working places, the people, and the goods that are produced at a phenomenal rate. Capitalism is able to increase production like there's no tomorrow, but there's a limitation to that, and that limitation is provided by the market. The goods that are produced because of the growing impoverishment of the working class, most times both absolute and relative, but at least relative to what is produced, their share decreases and they're unable to purchase these goods. And that leads to a crisis of overproduction, which clogs up production. And every now and then you have a crisis with millions of workers thrown out of employment. Now, it can only be because under capitalism, the means of production can function only if they have been turned into capital first, i.e., into the source of making profit for the capitalists. They have to be the source of extraction of surplus value. And in order to increase that surplus value, the capitalists are constantly in competition. Each one tries to outdo the other, which means he's got to produce his goods as cheaply as possible to stay in the competition. And that involves, of course, bringing the most up-to-date machines to do so. And the result of that, of course, is to produce more goods than could be absorbed. And when the capitalists said, really, socialism could not work because its object is to destroy the market. And without market, they said, there could be no financial calculation. There could be no efficient production because profit is absolute, because capitalism, the market, where prices are determined by the prices of production and competition. Without that, it would not be possible to have an efficient calculation. And secondly, that it destroys the incentive for production. Because to the capitalists, the people who are actually producers of wealth are the capitalists. And if you take away the profit motive, what is there for them left to do? And therefore, it will simply mean that socialism will fail, and in the end, the market will reassert itself. And this argument was treated quite rightly with total contempt by the Marxists, by the socialists of that time. And it was not actually accepted by the socialists. That is, apart from the renegade socialists who deserted to the side of the bourgeoisie, from Kautsky onwards to various people. But it really received the traction after the triumph of Khrushchevite revisionism in the Soviet Union at the 20th Party Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They, of course, like all revisionists, believed that market is absolutely essential, that market is there not only in the conditions of capitalism, but market will be there in the condition of socialism, even under the conditions of higher stage of socialism, namely communism. In other words, the market will always be there. The net result of that, the only conclusion is that capitalism is the final stage of the humanity's long march from primitive communism to the present day. Well, the humanity would not put up with that. That when the Soviet Union collapsed, as a result of the economic reforms that had been put into place by the revisionists in the Soviet Union, over a period of 30 years, they actually managed to undermine the planned socialist economy. And hand in hand with the ideological degeneration of the Communist Party, the hollowing out of the ideological content of philosophy, they were able, of course, to restore capitalism. And by the end of 1991, the Soviet Union was no more. But of course, you have to ask the question: how was it possible for the revisionists to restore the market after so many years of planned development, which had produced marvelous results, which was the only economy in the 30s which was growing by leaps and bounds when the capitalist world was stricken by a crisis of overproduction, the Great Depression of the late 1920s and early 1930s. Well, they had to do that in order to undermine socialism. They couldn't attack Lenin. Lenin is far above being attacked. So they found a formula, and the formula was to attack Stalin. That Stalin had gutted the Soviet economy. He was a monster. He killed millions of people. That he was somebody who knew nothing about warfare, who could not lead the Soviet armed forces in the Second World War. So basically, the idea was to discredit Stalin, not directly because of him, but in order to undermine the achievements that had been taking place under his leadership. And most of the Soviet achievements were those that took place under his leadership. And because Lenin died early in 1924, so Stalin was at the helm for 30 long years, and Soviet economic development, Soviet cultural development, Soviet defense development, and development in every area of human endeavor happened while he was in the leadership of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and basically also the world communist movement. So they had to do that, and then saying that under him, the economy was not doing very well because there was too much dictating from the above, and there was not enough initiative. The economy had become rather strangulated by too much overbearing commands from the economy. So they used the words for central planning as the command economy, and they had to get rid of it and bring in reforms. But they said would make for an easy transition, to the highest stage of socialism, i.e. communism. And so they attacked Stalin. And in the course of doing so, they obviously restored capitalism. Now, something like that happened. And the question is, why would you do that? I think I can find the answer to that question in the following quotation of Karl Marx. In the domain of political economy, free scientific inquiry meets not merely the same enemies as in all other domains. The peculiar nature of the material it deals with summons as foes into the field of battle the most violent, mean, and malignant passions of human breast, the furies of private interest. The English established church, says Marx, will more readily pardon an attack on 38 of its 39 articles than on 1/39 of its income. Nowadays, atheism is itself culpa levis, i.e. minor sin. compared with criticism of existing property relations. So obviously, their motivation for attacking Stalin was to restore capitalism and to restore, of course, the privileges of the exploiting classes. And that being the case, they had to attack the person who was most responsible for fighting against market and for rejecting market socialism. Something similar happens in the case of China. And that is, from 1978 onwards, the revisionists in China, of course, had exactly the same aims and purposes that the revisionists in the Soviet Union had followed much earlier. And they also found a way of doing that. And the idea was to attack Mao Zedong. But Mao Zedong was highly respected by the Chinese people. It would be very dangerous and very difficult to attack Mao directly. So what they did was they attacked him through what they called the Gang of Four. They targeted 4 of Mao Zedong's closest followers, including Mao Zedong's wife, Jiang Jing. And so everything that they said had gone wrong was because of the Gang of Four. It wasn't Mao Zedong's work. So in doing so, they eventually laid the ground for their reforms. And the reforms, I have to admit that under the reforms that they brought in, and they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics, it's merely a euphemism for marketization of the Chinese economy. And this marketization, insofar as it made China's economy very big, and I have to admit that the people who run Chinese economy have made a success of running a market economy, but it hasn't come without its price. And the price has been in every single field, from health to education, from one-child policy to questions of war and peace. And of course, as production increases China, it has brought into its trail the crisis of overproduction. Socialist economy cannot have a crisis of overproduction because production there is conducted to satisfy the needs of the population. It is conducted on the basis of planned production. You plan according to the needs of society, to measure those needs, and you produce. And the question of overproduction does not arise. In a market economy, there's overproduction because people cannot buy the goods, not because they don't need the goods, but they cannot buy the goods. So China has regularly faced what I can call crisis of overproduction. To give you one example, after the almighty crisis of capitalism in 2007 and 2008, which brought the financial institutions of capitalism in the Western countries to near collapse. The Chinese, who were dependent on foreign markets, lost 30 million jobs, and 60,000 factories were literally shut in a matter of weeks. So that is precisely what happens relying on the market. Chinese health and education suffered because once they were bent upon creating the market conditions, and that really means every industry, every individual enterprise had to be profitable. And a lot of enterprises were closed, a lot of enterprises were privatized. And the result of that was, in order to make profits in every single enterprise, in every sector of the economy, they had to make workers very productive, get rid of lot of workers. And that, of course, left not enough resources for, if you like, social provision. Under Mao Zedong, under his leadership, the Chinese people had a health system which covered most of the population. They had workplaces provided workers working there with health facilities, with education and schools, with holidays, with every other kind of social facility, with housing. But of course, since the markets came in China, the various sectors of the economy has been privatized. Housing is privatized. Agriculture has been decollectivized, which was a most backward step, because privatizing agriculture meant you simply had to hand over, divide landed property into small plots and give it to the peasantry under what was known as the household responsibility system. For the first few years, it worked well because the state raised the prices of agricultural products and allowed the peasants to sell privately on the market. So for 4 or 5 years, production increased, but since then, its results have come through. And the very bourgeois economists who applauded the privatization of agriculture, the decollectivization of agriculture, have been saying for years that small farms cannot be the basis of scientific agriculture. On this, I agree with them. They cannot be the basis of scientific agriculture because they're too small to be the basis of scientific agriculture. Agriculture can only be successful under large-scale farming, whether it is under capitalism or socialism. So if it's not working, there's only two ways around. One is back to collectivization and organizing the peasants in collective farms, and that is, of course, the socialist way. The other one is to actually go the whole hog, allowing the peasants to sell their farms, which of course would mean in the end the same as it has happened in capitalist countries all over the world, namely the small farms die over a period of time and their property is concentrated in the hands of the few. So there's a collectivization, if you like, of a capitalist nature, or there's collectivization of a socialist nature. And basically, the Chinese opted for second. Of course, they have blatantly recognized that something has to be done. And they have put money into education, they put money into health, but that didn't start till 2009. And so a lot of people are now getting some of the benefits of publicly provided health and education. But even now, people cannot afford to easily get medical treatment. It's one of the biggest expenses. They have to pay for education as well. And these two expenses bear very heavily on Chinese families. They got to have money to pay for the kids' education, and they got to have money to pay for their fees when they go into hospitals. Of course, in order to see if economy is run on socialist grounds, you got to see what the property relations are. If you privatize property, if you actually allow labor itself to become a commodity, and if you restore exploitation, you gut, if you like, the essence of socialism. And that's been happening in China. And that really essentially is my basic thesis from the study of the Chinese economy. But I think I'll be much better off answering your questions rather than taking a lot of time discussing the same thing myself.
Okay, thank you, Harpal. I will give it a few minutes for announcements. I'll ask Alan first, and then following Alan, others who want to make an announcement. I guess Jean will make some announcements. Alan, you want to go first? Please go.
Sure. We have some great programs coming up. I want to call your attention to next week. We have a program it's the 2-year anniversary of the Russian special military operation, the intervention in Ukraine. And we are going to have a speaker, Slava from Ukraine, and she is going to be speaking. She's a Ukrainian American Marxist-Leninist who was born in Western Ukraine, now lives in the United States, and she's going to be speaking about 2 years of since the intervention and what's going on today, and giving kind of a personal perspective on why she supports the Russian intervention in Ukraine. Should be a very interesting analysis and something that you can only really get from an alternative source like ours today. So do come in today. Following that, we're going to have Andrew Feinstein, who is a London-based South African who was involved in the ANC, the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And he will be speaking on Palestine and the struggle against apartheid in Palestine and Israel. And very, very interesting speaker, good speaker on the topic. So tune in for that. Following that, I don't have the in front of me, but if you'd like to sign up for notifications on future programs, go to our website, icssmarks.org, and there'll be a sign up box will pop up. Add your name and your email. You'll receive email notifications for future programs. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Raj.
Okay, and is Richard there? Richard, could you please make the appeal for funds?
Okay.
Richard Fallenbaum.
Right. Go ahead and unmute, Richard.
Yeah, just to follow up on Alan's, you can go to the website, and you'll see an opportunity which is icssmarks.org. You can see a place where you can donate. We do have need, although
Can you press those
most
because I'm not hearing very well.
I'm sorry if you can't hear me. Just go to the web. We need funds continually to maintain this operation. We're sort of expanding and trying to make things better. Make the our outreach on YouTube and other places better, and get this very, very valuable material out to more and more people. And that requires some funds, not a great deal. And currently we're depending on a very few number of small contributors, and it'd be helpful if other people could contribute even on a monthly basis. So please go to our website again, icssmarks.org, and you'll see how to donate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we will proceed to question answer period. And let me set some ground rules for that. This is a respectful forum for people's opinions, so please be mindful of that. If you have comments, keep them to the briefest possible. I will encourage everybody to ask a question. It's a very valuable time that we have the author who's done a tremendous research on the subject to raise questions rather than make comments in support or in opposition to China. So that'll be more useful. With that said, and your time is 2 minutes maximum, we'll try to do it in less than 2 minutes if possible. So the first person to ask the question is Norma Harrison. Norma, please unmute yourself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Harper, thanks. I am the greatest defender of the struggle for socialism, communism, and I'm very old, so I've been here a long time, thinking that we do everything we can in order to achieve our goal. And that's what I think even Russia and China do and are doing. And in this light, I ask, what do you think about the possibilities? I keep insisting to people that China is just using capitalism as a tool to maintain itself and advance its intention to build the socialist and communist struggle. Do you have any opinion about that?
Yeah, go ahead, Harpal, please. We'll do one question and one answer. So Harpal, please go ahead to respond.
Unmute yourself first.
Yeah. My opinion on that, Comrade Harrison, is that I do not believe that capitalism is capable of having greater productivity of labor than socialism. There are a number of reasons for that. Capitalism every now and then goes through a crisis of overproduction, during which time tremendous amount of productive resources and human beings are destroyed. So you can't call it a more efficient system than socialism. Socialism, in fact, by releasing the energies of the masses of people who for the first time become the masters of the means of production, are able to contribute to the development of production on a scale that capitalism is incapable of doing. And I can only point you to the achievements made by the Soviet Union during the 30s and 40s and 50s. They were gigantic achievements. That's why Soviet Union earned such ire of the imperialist bourgeoisie. Even now, they will not forget, now that the Soviet Union hasn't been there for 30 years. Every morning, there is the prayer that you hear in the newspapers, on the radio, on television, and everywhere, that socialism is dead, communism is dead. Well, if it's dead, there's no need to speak about it. I give this example quite often, and you may be bored to hear me say it again. If you said today, Napoleon is dead, you'd be laughed at in the face as being a lunatic. Of course, Napoleon is dead. Why do you have to say Napoleon is dead? The very fact that they constantly try to say communism is dead is that the bourgeoisie cannot rest easy. Every time they go to bed to sleep, their sleep is disturbed by the specter of communism taking place everywhere in the world. That's why they constantly got to instill in the working class the skepticism in order to make them feel they're incapable of destroying the present system and building a new society. So my own view is that market is not the way to achieve successes in socialist production. In fact, my own view is, and I'm a supporter of China, I'm not against China. I welcome the rise of China after the century of humiliation. I'm a friend of China, but I personally think China would have made even greater progress if it hadn't gone down the market route, if it had followed the line of centralized planning, which it did right up to the late 70s. So I do not believe market is the way to make production more efficient or to get greater productivity of labor.
Maybe in line with that, you have an idea, just 1 second. You have an idea of places where the struggle towards socialism and communism is going on in the world. And I don't mean to take you back to where you were, but I just thought we'd add that in there.
If you have another question, please come back again. I'm going to move forward. So next in line is Grover Furr. Grover, please unmute yourself.
Hi, Harpal. It's great to see you again.
Hi, Grover. Nice to see you.
Yeah, but please extend my greetings to Ella as well. We saw your son and daughter.
I will. She's sitting here. I will extend your greetings to her.
Great. Okay, real quick. So the first time I was invited to China, 2014, I was supposed to go and give a talk someplace. Graduate students sent a cab over with some graduate students in it to take me to wherever the talk was going to be, some university. And the first thing they asked me as soon as I got in the cab was, is China a socialist country? So I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who they were. So I said, well, I just got off the plane. I really haven't been here but an hour or two. What do you think? And they all uniformly said, no way. China is not a socialist country. This is 2014. So I want to ask you, is China a socialist country?
I find it very difficult to give an answer to this question, but on balance, when pushed to it, I'd say it is a socialist country, but if it does not reverse the market processes, it won't stay socialist for a very long time. It'll go the same way as the Soviet Union. I think that Xi Jinping, ever since he came into office in, I think, 2012, he has been doing something to do it. But of course, he has a problem. He has been dealt a very bad card. Before him, there were leaders of the Communist Party of China, beginning from 1978 onward with Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and various others. They've been pushing the market reform. They've been privatizing industry on a large scale. And therefore, it's very difficult to deal with it overnight. But what can be said in favor of China is it has still got a very large state sector. But the state sector also is run on market basis. It's run on the basis of profitability. It's run not on the basis of having planned production for the benefit of the people. It's run on market basis. They have initial public offerings on various stock exchanges in the world, and it's run basically on that basis. And I do not think it's the right way of restoring socialism. But they do have a large public sector, which is particularly dominant in the area of public utilities, in the case of energy, in the case of telecommunications, and in the case of tobacco industry, and one or two others, where the state is definitely very dominant. And of course, they pride themselves on the fact that these sectors produce huge profits, 30 or 40% a year. Because one of the yardsticks for capitalists of whether an industry is efficient or not is not what it produces for the needs of people. It is how much money it makes and how much profit there is. And of course, if profitability becomes the yardstick of production, if it becomes the regulator of production, it undermines the entire idea of socialist planned economy.
Okay, so we'll go to Ann Garrison. Ann, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether you have anything to say about the role of China in Africa, and particularly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where Chinese corporations brutally exploit artisanal miners. And some people say, well, that's Congo's problem. It's Congo's, these are the conditions of production in the Congo. And others say, no, China shouldn't be doing this. China should do something about it.
Insofar as I know anything about Chinese operations, be they in Africa, be they in Latin America, be they in some other countries, I think the effect of Chinese involvement in those countries is very, very beneficial to the people of those countries. I don't know the details of every single country. I don't know the details of every single sector, but the Chinese have brought tremendous amount of benefits to these countries. Even bourgeois authors who write for the Financial Times, who cannot be regarded as a friend of China or a friend of non-market economies, actually has to admit that when Chinese go and they enter into agreements, there's always at the end of it a hospital, a university, a cricket stadium, schools, factories that they leave behind, as opposed to what the European capitalists do, namely, most of the money is spent on getting surveys and experts to see whether something can be done. At the end, not much happens. And loans are made to these countries, which they are actually unable to pay. This, in my view, is not with the case with China. China has brought tremendous amount of relief to these countries. And even the leaders of these countries admit that China, for the first time, have given them the chance to be spoken to with respect by the Western imperialist countries, because there is an alternative to them. They can go somewhere else for help. And this, of course, gives them, apart from benefits economically, dignity in themselves. That's my knowledge. I don't claim to be expert on every single country.
Yeah, I've just got one
Okay.
other quick question. Just quick question for the organizers here. I have to go before this is over. Will the recording become available shortly
Yeah.
thereafter?
It
Okay,
will.
thanks. Okay, thanks.
Okay. So I'll go to Jean, followed by Roger Harris. Jean, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Harpal, for joining us, and really appreciate everything you had to say. And um, thanks so much. But I do have to say, I have a little bit different perspective, I think. And maybe some people think that I'm an uncritical supporter of the Chinese Revolution, and that may be true. But I think the Chinese themselves are not uncritical, that they do have a lot of criticisms of their own country, and they don't say they're a perfect country. But I think this has to be put into perspective in terms of Chinese history and the century of humiliation which was imposed upon the Chinese by the foreign powers, including the United States, or primarily the United States. And with the Opium Wars, all the unequal treaties, and the whole thing there. And the force that took them out of that was the Communist Party of China and the People's Liberation of China. And out of this, I think there's a tremendous support on the part of the Chinese. I mean, it has the largest Communist Party in the world. It has the largest and strongest working class organization, trade union organizations in China, and overwhelming support of the Chinese people. And I think the surveys by Harvard University, I think, there's a 95% approval rate of the Chinese people of their government, compared with, 35% here in the United States. So, I think the Chinese are doing a lot right, and they don't claim to be perfect. But I just want to offer that perspective and hear your reaction to this point of view.
Well, I quite agree with you. Chinese don't claim to be perfect, but depends on what you mean by that. You can claim not to be perfect. You could say, well, you're not perfect because you're not implementing the reforms very, very, very properly, as the case may be. But to my mind, it's not a question of perfection. Perfection is a very long-term aim, and it's not something achieved over a short period of time. But the fact of the matter is that the market is not the way to achieving perfection. That's my basic argument, really. I completely agree with you that the overwhelming majority of the Chinese people are satisfied with the government, and they're happy to do that. I do not dispute that even for a second. But what I'm saying is China could have achieved far more had it not followed the market line. Market has brought a lot of distress to the Chinese people. People working in factories like Foxconn, which really are like army barracks, where they're shut into little rooms, several people sleeping in a small room under the most horrible conditions. Till, of course, some suicides took place, and Chinese government had to take notice of what was taking place, and they've taken measures to stop those abuses. But all the same, when you say production is the main important thing, I'm not against production. I'm in favor of production. There has to be increased production in order to supply people with the goods that they need and to progress further in the direction of communism. But you can't go in the direction of communism by going the market route, because you're going in completely the opposite direction. That's my dispute, and that's my criticism of the Chinese authorities. It's not that they have made no progress. Of course, they made progress. If, for example, now in the last 3 years or 4 years, under pressure from US imperialism, they've started producing very advanced chips. Well, they could have done it much earlier. Had they not followed the market, they were spending $320 billion a year to buy chips from various American companies that they could have produced themselves. So really, that is the case. And of course, in doing so, they have brought into existence a very, very powerful bourgeoisie. There are more billionaires in China than in any other country than the United States of America. Out of the over just 3,000 billionaires in the world, over 700 are in China. That is not really the way to go in the direction of socialism. That's why I wrote this book. I was most reluctant to write this book, basically for two reasons. Because, out of the instinct for self-preservation. It's like Voltaire in his deathbed asked the question, do you still not believe in God? He said, now is not the time to make new enemies. Well, I have a plentiful supply of enemies. I didn't need to make new ones. But once I was literally coerced by my party to write it, I could only produce what I have produced, which I honestly believe to be correct. I think overwhelming majority of my party agree with what I have written, but there would be one or two comrades who don't agree, which they have the perfect right to disagree with. That's my position. I do not want Chinese economy to be entangled the way it is with imperialism. Its economy is inseparably connected and integrated into imperialist economies. That exactly is not the way to go forward to socialism. That's my view.
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment on the 800 million people that have been lifted out of poverty and the claim on that topic also, because that's widespread.
Yes, they have been lifted out of poverty because a lot of production. As a result, one of the specific features of imperialism is export of capital as opposed to export of goods. And imperialist countries that actually have far too much capital and it overflows the limits of their national economies have to invest somewhere. And China opening the market has allowed them to do so. So this huge amount of production takes place in China that has provided, of course, employment to a lot of people. But what I want to say is people will tell you 800 million have been lifted out of poverty since the reforms came in. But they never, ever talk about what happened to China between liberation in October 1949 and the beginning of the reforms. The fact of the matter is, during those years, health of the Chinese people improved beyond measure. Their education improved beyond measure. They had actually detonated the first nuclear weapon. They had sent objects into space, and development was made in various fields of science and agriculture. So, and also during those 30 years, the longevity of life increased by 30 years, which means 1 year extra of life for each year. And that is not even taken into account. So what reformists have built is on the basis of what was built those days. Even reactionary writers like Will Hutton have said that if nothing had been built during the period during the pre-reform period, there would be nothing for the reformists to reform. They could only reform because there was so much built. So I personally want you to take the whole thing into account. Chinese economy has been growing at the rate of about 6 or 7% ever since its liberation, apart from the outlier years of 1959 to 62, when China was affected very much by drought as well as floods. China has been making that progress at the same route, but this is not talked about. They only talk about the wonders of market reforms, but it doesn't mean that market economies always bring misery. There was a period when capitalism was developing by leaps and bounds. For example, in the period of the Second World War, they brought prosperity as well. It wasn't brought as a result of socialism. It was brought under the conditions of capitalism. So I would not deny that this progress has been made and China has lifted people out of poverty. But I mean, the idea of poverty is very, very different. They do it in dollar terms. What they don't want to say is what facilities did the Chinese laboring classes have prior to the reforms and what facilities they do have since then. So if you just say somebody is earning more than $3 a day, is out of poverty, that by itself is not a very, very good measure in my view. GDP tells not the whole story, because the way capitalist GDP is, you spend a lot of money on alcohol, that contributes to GDP. People go for prostitution, that contributes towards GDP. So somebody who goes 7 times a week to a prostitute, he's contributing seven times as much of GDP as the person who only goes once a week. That's a very lunatic way of looking at it. To me, the productivity is how many hospitals you build, how many schools you build, what health provision you give to people, what do various other facilities you provide look like. And if you take that into account, China made a lot of progress prior to the reforms as well as since. And I do not want to deny the progress Chinese have made since the reforms came. But my point, the bottom line of my argument has always been they would have done even better and avoid all the misfortunes that befell literally hundreds of millions of people in China consequent upon market reforms, where literally, as a result of privatization, 30 million people lost their jobs in industry. Housing ceased to be a social provision. Education and health became very expensive. And there are a lot of caustic comments and very sarcastic comments in Chinese social media, where people say, I can't afford to live, but I can't afford to die because the cost of a funeral is that much high.
Thank you.
Okay, so Roger Harris is next.
Okay, thank you, Raj, and thank you, Harpal, for an excellent presentation. I had a question relating a little bit to the international relations of China today, and specifically about the question of socialist solidarity. The idea that socialist countries have a particular responsibility to help other socialist countries, and in doing so, help the socialist movement internationally. And so what is your understanding of the current, what is your understanding of the Chinese's current understanding of how they apply socialist solidarity as a socialist country? And in particular, my interest is with Latin America, where we have Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua all striving for socialism, heavily impacted by the imperialist. And Cuba especially, there's a situation that has gone from dire to desperate. And the Chinese have the ability, that would be not very big in terms of financial cost, of making a major change in Cuba and helping them. Yet the Chinese seem to be reluctant to do so. The Chinese seem to be reluctant to excite the imperialist superpower of the United States, to incite it to be more aggressive toward China. We see that also in the Chinese allowing the UN Security Council to approve a military occupation in Haiti. The appearance seems to be that the Chinese leadership at this point are looking to consolidate their internal situation, particularly what you alluded to, their own bourgeoisie, before they take on a more confrontational position toward the United States, which appears to be inevitable. So I would like you to comment on those questions, please.
Well, in a matter of fact, the Chinese do help many countries like Venezuela and Cuba by continuing to trade with them and giving them financial support, either directly or through the Belt and Road Initiative. So you can't fault them on that. But of course, you do not get the same kind of support that you got during the days of Stalin. I do not know what your audience think of Stalin, but I am an unashamed admirer of Stalin. I think he was one of, after Lenin, the best leaders the world communist movement had and the Soviet Union had. Those days, they could openly come and saying, this is what American imperialism is doing. But these days, people try to hide themselves, keep their head below the parapet in case they annoy US imperialism. The only country that actually defies US imperialism openly is the little country of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, i.e. North Korea. They're able to say, this is imperialism. We fight against them. If you attack us, we will attack you. For a small country of 22 million people with hardly any natural resources, for them to develop their defensive capabilities, and they went for the nuclear weapon only because American imperialism was putting so much pressure over the years over them that ordinary conventional defense would consume all their budget. They'd be left with nothing for development, and nuclear weapons were a cheaper option for them to do. And what's more, it's something that frightens the daylight out of imperialist powers, because America knows that the North Koreans would not blink. If you attack them, they will attack back, and there will be a price to pay. And big countries, China among them, Russia among them, don't do that. They always try to say, I mean, it annoys me no end when Putin comes on the television and talks about our American partners. Well, it's a kind of partnership between a gangster and the person that he's about to rob. You know, there is a partnership. One hands over the wallet and the other one takes it. But all the same, in practice, at the moment, as it seems to me, call it internationalism, call it whatever you will, the cooperation between China and Russia is extremely important in the defeat of NATO countries in their fight to actually have a regime change in Russia and to basically dismember Russia into small, very easily digestible morsels. So they're doing that. And China is doing that in Africa, Russia is doing it in Africa, and they're both doing it in Latin America. So in actual practice, there is some help, and that's why they've earned the hostility of imperialist countries. Putin has become a synonym for the devil. You know, they can't bear it. One of their journalists goes and interviews Putin, and everybody is up in arms. What is so special about one journalist from America going to interview Putin? Every avenue of a different narrative from the one that's given by imperialist administrations all over the world is repressed. Members of my own party have been arrested by the police and kept overnight in police cells because they were distributing literature with on one occasion they said incited race hatred. Can you believe us inciting race hatred? And you have to be absolutely mad to make that accusation. On another occasion, they were told that they were supporting terrorism because one of our leaflets said, in regard to the war in Gaza, in Palestine, Israel, victory to the resistance. It didn't even mention Hamas. And I don't really see why mentioning Hamas itself should be a crime. After all, until less than 2 months ago, Hamas was recognized by Western countries. They had dealings with Hamas. So we don't change our mind on resistance movements just because imperialism has woken up one day and said they have become terrorist organizations. To me, one man's terrorist is another man's liberation fighter. I'm absolutely certain at the time that the American colonists were fighting for the liberation from British colonialism in the late 18th century. The British administration described George Washington and his comrades as terrorists. Now, you can take that if you like or not, but that's precisely what they did. And they continued to wage war against the newly established American Republic. In 1812, they bombed the White House, came up the Potomac River and bombed the White House. That's what they used to do. Of course, now they have to submit to the same state that they tried so much to prevent the emergence of. So my view is, yes, the Chinese and Russians are giving support, but for the think the most internationalist contribution is to work not openly. The Chinese don't say openly that they're supporting, but there is cooperation. The trade last year that between the two countries surpassed $200 billion a year, and it's increasing by leaps and bounds. They're both beginning to trade in currencies other than the dollar, in their own currencies or some third currency. And in this way, they're undermining imperialism, and I applaud that very much. The defeat of NATO in the war in Ukraine, which I'm absolutely certain will take place in the near future, but it will pay for it because it will weaken imperialism. Anything that weakens imperialism actually gives a chance to emerging movements for socialism.
Okay, thank you. So next in the stack is Mehmet, followed by Janet and Anne. So Mehmet, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a good presentation. First of all, I'd like to make an announcement. Last week, there was a demonstration in front of the Travis Air Force Base here in California. It was a good one, and there's going to be another one on February the 24th, and it's going to be for exposing the Israel and United States, attack on the people of Palestine. So everybody is invited there. Now, after that, I'd like to come back to the question of, you said that in Africa and maybe other places, what China does is helping those countries. Now, the word country is ambiguous, because we don't look at countries as countries. We look at it from the perspective of classes. And many of those countries are being ruled by bourgeoisie, which are tied to imperialism from their umbilical cord, and they will never, ever, do anything that imperialism does not want. So I'm wondering if this help is actually helping the bourgeoisie of those countries when they are under tremendous capitalist imperialist pressure, because we know capitalism doesn't work and it creates tremendous crisis all over the place. And is it the role of a socialist country to come in and ease these pressures that is on the bourgeoisie, when the working class in those countries are exerting other pressures on their ruling class? An example of this was back in 1960s, 70s. You mentioned about how the revisionists actually took over the Soviet Union, which I agree 100%. And the way that those revisionists dealt with other countries was that they thought if they could help those countries would kind of sway away from imperialism and maybe not look at Soviet Union as a foe, as an enemy. I'm from Turkey, and we've experienced this help from Soviet Union. Turkey was in dire crisis due to imperialism, due to capitalism, and Soviet Union came to solve these problems for us. They built iron factories, they built steel factories, they built aluminum factories. Actually, just yet. Okay, well, closing, just 1 minute. Just the other day, I saw buildings that were built by Soviet Union right in the center of an earthquake that happened last year, and all the other buildings collapsed, but those buildings built by them are still up and they are standing. But you know what? What the Turkish bourgeoisie did was to sell those factories, privatize them, sell them to as scrap metal, and strengthen their ties to imperialism. So I would like to understand how this helping countries is not helping the bourgeoisie, but is helping the people. Thank you.
First of all, I follow the Leninist line of making a distinction between oppressing nations and oppressed nations. I mean, Lenin changed the formula of workers of the world unite to workers and oppressed peoples of the world unite. because he was of the view, and I think it was the correct view, that oppressed nations have their own problems with imperialism. They may look like subservient servants of imperialism, but at the bottom of it, their interests are very different from that of imperialism. And of course, it is our duty in the struggle against imperialism to help anybody who would stand up in the near or distant future against imperialism. To give you just one example, the Soviet Union supported Afghan governments, although they were led not by bourgeois politicians and bourgeois ruling class, but by feudal ruling class, who did not understand socialism, who had not had socialism as a part of their program. On the other hand, the Labour Party in Britain talked about socialism, but it was an imperialist party that oppressed other people in the interest of its own bourgeoisie. So there's a distinction between that. I think we should not forget that distinction. Today, are the Palestinians fighting for socialism? Of course they are not. They're fighting for national liberation. Do you, in the circumstances, say you'll only be helping the bourgeoisie if you help the Palestinians? Now, that may be an extreme example, but that takes place all over the world. To the extent that you help to free these countries from the clutches of imperialism, they become much more daring and independent. As far as the internal question is concerned, that's for the people of those countries to solve. Let the working class of Turkey, let the working class of any other country that you have in mind overthrow their bourgeoisie. We're not standing against the way of that. But the state in state relations, it's better that socialist countries help those countries, whoever they're ruled by, to be able to become more powerful in resisting imperialist demands. And Turkey these days, yes, it may be a bourgeoisie. I don't like Erdogan. I'm not a supporter of Erdogan, but he's giving not a small amount of trouble to imperialism. You don't know what his policy is. Is he going to fight with NATO against Russia? What is he going to do? And it is because of the ambivalent position they find themselves. They're tied to imperialism. They've been tied to imperialism since the 1950s. They were the southern flank of NATO. But Russia has a lot of influence over them. They built a huge nuclear power plant for them. They're supplying all sorts of goods to them. And when Turkey was playing hardball with Russia, they took some action. They simply stopped the Russian people going for a holiday to Turkey. They stopped importing Turkish agricultural produce, and that brought Erdogan to senses in those areas. That's my view. Or take the relationship of Pakistan and China. Well, Pakistan is not exactly a democratic country, even by bourgeois terms, and all the same, by doing that, they encourage to a certain extent the ruling class in those countries to make a break with imperialism. And precisely because one of their leaders, Imran Khan, tried to distance himself, not break from imperialism, but distance himself, it resulted in his ousting from office. And he's serving jail term now for no other reason that he said that he had been ousted from office at the instigation of US imperialism. And he condemned American drone strikes on targets in Pakistan. He objected to what they were doing in Afghanistan. And precisely for that reason, the imperialists combined to get him ousted from office. And what is happening in Pakistan is extremely interesting, and you will see its results very, very shortly, the turmoil that these developments are causing. But I'm afraid these things take time. It doesn't happen overnight.
Okay, thank you. So Janet is next. Janet, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Harpal. I wondered why you didn't include slavery as the initial instance of capitalism, or mention colonization, or settler colonialism, but perhaps that's for another time. That said, would you talk about the role that military force and the police played in imposing and plays in maintaining and expanding markets and capitalism? In other words, could capitalism exist without military force? And would you also talk about the role propaganda plays in the capitalist project?
Well, it's combined. Of course, military force is extremely important. Without military force, imperialism cannot maintain its domination. I mean, then the famous words of that most reactionary of American journalist, Thomas Friedman, it's impossible for McDonald's to flourish without McDonnell Douglas. You need the American armed forces everywhere to protect American interests, and that is the case. This is exactly the same. The country I come from was colonized by the British, and without the army that they had mobilized, and they had mobilized, to my shame, a lot of Indians to serve them. So India was conquered not by the British, but by the Indians for the British. They were able to use divisions within Indian society to do that. But at the bottom of it, whatever their rhetoric, was the force. They were extremely shameless in their, and stupid at the same time, in their exploitation of India. And I think the same will go for everywhere. I don't know which slavery you meant, whether you meant the slavery in the southern states of America or
Yes.
ancient slavery. But of course, the southern states of America, of course, the American slavery in America was very much a part of the project of building the capitalist economy when they had difficulty having sufficient labor power to work. So they resorted to indentured laborers from Europe, but that was not enough. They resorted to indentured laborers from Asia. That wasn't enough. So they basically forcibly removed close to 20 million people from Africa and took them to America to work on the plantations. But as far as the ancient slavery is concerned, I'm afraid that is the first division of society into classes. But in the famous words of Engels, no ancient slavery, no modern socialism. Because what class society did with all its horrendous costs is over a period of time, they made eventually for the development of productive forces from feudalism, from slavery to feudalism to capitalism, and finally socialism. So, but as far as the American slavery is concerned, it's a part of capitalist slavery. It's not in ancient slavery. So if I didn't mention it, I can only apologize. But then there are lots of things I haven't mentioned because you would not want me to carry on forever.
Thank you.
Okay, Anne, you're next, please. Go ahead, Anne.
So I'm going to make this quick, but I really liked the fight against skepticism. I think it's absolutely critical, and really loved that part of your talk. And in that same spirit, I think the response to is China a socialist country, which we've been talking about, it feels like endlessly, and going around in circles here is so well answered by your response that it won't be if certain things don't happen. And in that, this may be too speculative or too technical, but I began thinking about how would a country go about having entered a global marketplace? How would they go about withdrawing from that? And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
I'm not against socialist countries trading with non-socialist countries. That has never been the position of socialists. As long as the other countries are capitalist and there are some countries that are socialist, trade is going to take place. Each country needs things that it hasn't got, and it gets from others in exchange for the goods that it's able to supply, which other countries don't. So I'm not against trade, but trade cannot become a major part of your economy. It cannot be the determinant factor of your economy. because most of the economy in a socialist country ought to be self-sufficient for the purpose of meeting the needs of its population and for defending itself against foreign aggression, etc. That should be the function of the economy. I'm not against foreign trade. I'm afraid as long as there is a division of the world into capitalist and non-capitalist countries, trade will continue to be there. In fact, it's capitalist countries who don't want the trade. They want the trade, but they don't want the other side to benefit at all. Somehow they want to be able to loot. Now that is not possible. And no socialist country will allow itself to be looted. So yes, I mean, they will trade. That's okay. I have no problem. But when the trade becomes 30% of your GDP, then you're asking for trouble in the circumstances, because trade can be stopped. A stop can be put into it, and that immediately has an effect on your economy, with millions of workers thrown out of employment, and thousands, tens of thousands of factories being decommissioned, as it happened in 2007, 2008, during the worst ever crisis of imperialism. China literally overnight lost millions of jobs, but 30 million jobs, and 60,000 factories were closed in a matter of weeks.
Okay, so Richard Fallenbaum, followed by Goulden. So Richard, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. You know, I think there's a sort of dialectic we have to take into account. Let me just say, you know, I think it was obvious that once there isn't a hard barrier between capitalism and socialism. Socialism is a transition state. So when, and I'm not going to be very good at explaining this, but you know, when there's a socialist, when there's a sort of revolution in a country like Russia or China, it doesn't mean everything's changed all of a sudden. The commodity relations don't disappear. The working class doesn't become overnight a communist working class. It doesn't fully form. It takes a long time for it to mature. And I think both in Russia, catastrophically, and in China, not catastrophically, they realized that there is a dialectic between the individual and the social, between capitalism and social communism and socialism. That, you know, there's not an iron curtain, and that they had to figure out how to manage those dialectical contradictions in a progressive direction. Now, I don't think they're still learning too, but I think one can go too far in coming up with examples of what one doesn't like about China or Russia, for that matter, which I think they're very similar in many respects. Because I think that the ruling elites in both countries, particularly China, are attempting to, from a communist viewpoint, manage the dialectics between capitalism and communism. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Yes, I can respond to it. The thing is that Marxism has various aspects to it: philosophical, ideological, and economics. If you throw out Marxist economics, you basically denude Marxism of its validity. If you start saying that only under capitalism can productivity of labor be achieved, what you're saying is Marxism is dead. That's literally what it is. You know, that is not my view. That was not Marx's view. If we are Marxists and we say we are Marxists and we're approaching problems of society from a Marxist standpoint, one thing what we must defend is Marxian economics. To me, that's the crux of it. Everything else comes after that. I'm glad you raised the question of commodity production. Commodity production hasn't always been there, but it has been there for a long time. It existed in slave society. It existed in feudal society. It only became dominant system of production under capitalism. And when socialism comes, it then, under socialist planning, begins to decline. And over a period of time, it disappears. So the trajectory of travel of commodity production, its emergence, its growth, its predominance, its decline, and its extinction. Now we've got to work for its extinction. If commodity production hasn't disappeared from countries like China and Russia, the two mighty countries that had socialist revolutions, there's a reason for that. Because in case of both China and Russia, it came into backward countries where the peasantry at the time was the majority of the population. And even after collectivization, you didn't have one sector of the economy. You had the state sector where everything, the means of production as well as the products were owned by the state. Then you had the collectivized sector where the means of production belonged to the whole people, it belonged to the state, but the product itself belonged to individual collective farms, and they disposed of them as they wanted. And at that time, they were only willing to have a relationship with the state sector on the basis of exchange, hence the continuation of commodity production. So it was really the result of the, if like, incomplete development of capitalism in societies that preceded socialism. So of course you can come to two conclusions. Why not wait for a socialist revolution till commodity production has basically been concentrated in fewer and fewer hands? It'll be easier to then nationalize all of them and have one single state sector which will dispose of the consumer goods of both the sectors. Well, that of course is a very social democratic point of view, put off the socialist revolution to some distant future. Whereas we think that the opportunities for taking over power, for making a socialist revolution, should not be wasted. And having come to power, the proletariat moves in the direction which would eventually lead to the elimination of private production, which really what the collective farm production is. It is social, but all the same, the product belongs to the individual collective farms. And in my view, that is the reason for the continued existence of commodity production in those societies. And that's why in his Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, Stalin makes the point that that is why we have commodity production. And because we have commodity production, it can only be on the basis of the law of value. It operates in that sector. But he said it was a matter of great concern to the Soviet Union that the economy should be developed in the direction whereby commodity production is eliminated by some sort of system which does not depend on exchange, but on products exchange. But he said that is something that has to be discussed. He didn't have a clear answer to that.
Okay, so Gulden, please unmute yourself and ask question. I'm going to go to all those who have not asked the question before I go to the second round people. So please be patient. Gulden, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Harpal, for your presentation. I agree with you in most of your analysis. I'm just confused on something. I know you talked about Turkey. I'm from Turkey as well. I'm the second person who's saying that today. Turkey's economy is considered as a mixed economy, in which there's a growing private sector combined with centralized economic planning and government regulations. It's about 16% of the labor force is in public sector in Turkey. as opposed to maybe 25% in China. And the labor movements and social movements are very much in control of government sources and very much punishable in Turkey. So in that aspect, it is similar to China, but we are far from talking about socialism in Turkey. You talked about Turkey being tied to imperialism, but I don't think this is the reason that we talked about socialism in China as opposed to not talk about socialism in Turkey. Does it make
With
sense?
both to the extent I understand, the difference between China and Turkey is China had a mighty revolution, which led to national liberation, which over a period of time was able to reach the stage of socialism, and they developed their economy on those lines. China was also very fortunate that for the first 10 years of its existence, it had tremendous help from the Soviet Union, whereas the Soviet Union was alone when it came into existence in the world, and it was the subject of embargo from the imperialist countries. China, on the other hand, the support of the Soviet Union, which, for reasons which we cannot go into today, disappeared after the Sino-Soviet split, if you like. But Turkey has never been in that state. Turkish revolution got stuck at the level of the merchants. Lenin's government tried its very best to help the Turks fight against imperialism, and it gave tremendous help. Even if you go to Ankara today, there's a statue in the middle of Ankara which has various people who fought for the Turkish state, and one of them is Frunze, famous Russian Red Army person who went there to fight. But of course, the Turks didn't return the compliment. They didn't actually cooperate very much with the Soviet Union. But the fact of the matter is, Turkish state only exists because of the help it received from Russia, not only later, but even during Lenin's time. But Turkey did not have a proper revolution, and that explains all the difference. Of course, capitalism has developed considerably in Turkey, and there is industry. But all capitalist countries have large number of forces that are employed by the state. Even America, the land of the free, you would think every aspect of American life is dominated by private capital. That is not the case. There are a lot of people who are employed in services which are provided by the state. In most imperialist countries in Europe, 20-25% of the labor force is employed by the state in one form or the other.
Okay.
I don't know whether I've answered your question.
Okay, so Gulden, is it okay for me to proceed to Alan? I think your question was answered.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
so Alan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Harpal. First of all, I just want to say that thank you for writing your book. I know it was a real challenge, and I think it's a real contribution to the literature about socialism in China and socialism in general for humanity. So thank you. I also want to comment that the quality of the discussion today is really excellent. And I think it's a testimony to the ideas that you're bringing to our forum today. And thank you very much for appearing. What I'd like you to comment on, it's kind of two questions, but they're related to each other. First of all, can you comment on the sections of the left that say that China and Russia are a competing imperialist bloc that are in opposition to imperialism, but Western imperialism or US-led imperialism, but themselves don't really warrant support in opposing imperialism because they're just basically trying to grab their own piece of real estate. related to that, can you comment generally on the significance of the rise of China and Russia and BRICS on the world revolution and maybe the working class even in the imperialist countries?
Well, I'm afraid I have a very, very poor view of the left in the imperialist countries. Present company excluded, I don't have a very high opinion of them because I think they're basically the left wing of imperialism. Whatever imperialism says today, the left is bound to follow tomorrow. From the press, which is completely controlled by imperialism, it's owned by imperialist interests. You don't expect the imperialist-owned press to be anti-imperialist. They are not, and they never will be. So, as far as I'm concerned, I don't pay much regard to what the left is saying. Neither Russia nor China are imperialists. For one thing, the imperialist club is actually closed to entry. It's no longer allowing anybody to enter it. Secondly, if they were imperialists, let's say just for the sake of argument, they're imperialists. So taking the 1 billion that are already in the imperialist club, that will take 3 billion people into the imperialist club. Are they living off the backs of a minority of the world's population? I mean, some go further. They say India is an imperialist country. South Africa is an imperialist country. You don't know what they will come up with next. Tomorrow, it'll be Rwanda, Burundi, that's an imperialist country. You can't argue with people like that because the economics and political situation is they're not imperialist country. Russia is a capitalist country. China is a socialist country. If they are fighting in their own way to actually frustrate the attempts of imperialism to dominate the world, I applaud that very much, and I don't really think they are imperialists. Capitalist Russia is fighting an existential threat to its existence. It does not want to be dismembered. It does not want a regime change. Russian people can vote Vladimir Putin out of office if they want to. But whatever imperialist press and media say, he is actually more popular since the start of the military operation than even before. They try and make leaders out of nobody. Today they bring Navalny. Tomorrow they bring somebody who's shamefully the son of a renegade socialist Browder, Bill Browder, who is conducting a campaign against Putin, as though single-handedly he would somehow bring down the Russian government. That is not the case. Russia, but what they're angry about Putin is that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia was literally prostrate, and imperialism took advantage of it. It looted huge amounts of resources built by the labor of the Soviet people during the period of 7 decades of socialist construction, and Yeltsin allowed it to happen. Since Putin came, he's put Russia on its feet and taken control of things and stopped that. And that is the reason of their enmity towards Putin, nothing else. They're not worried about democracy, rule of law or something. You think there's a rule of law in Palestine now? Where the Zionists, who literally are the present-day Nazis, who are killing children, women, defenseless people, destroying all their accommodation, displacing almost the entire population of Gaza, and they could not do it for 1 week, as one of your compatriots, be it said in his honor, Max Blumenthal says, Biden could stop this war before his conversation with the television crew was over by simply phoning, if you don't stop your bombing of Gaza, there will be no more arms for you. We will not give spare parts for your F-15, F-16 airplanes, and there will be no loans granted to you, and Israel will come to its senses. A lot of people say, oh no, Israel controls the American administration. That's rubbish. Israel is a puppet of Anglo-American imperialism, without whose backing and support it could not survive for a very long time at all. And it's known to the Zionists. And they only take advantage of this as long as the imperialists find it convenient for them to support Israel. Israel is an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and it's a dagger directed at the heart of the Arab people, democratic and socialist revolutions. That's really the place. So I do not accept Russia to be an imperialist country. And when they say, oh, this is an imperialist war, when the left says, we have no side to choose, my party unashamedly and boldly says, we have a side to choose, and that's the side of Russia against NATO. We are in favor of the defeat of NATO and the imperialist countries in their endeavor to bring a regime change in Russia and dismember Russia. We're equally against the so-called pivot to Asia, which was brought into operation by the first Black American president. We welcomed the election of Obama, not because we had any illusions. We knew whoever occupies that position, whatever they are, their job is to serve as a chief executive of US imperialism. They will do nothing different. But it was only good in the sense that in the history of that republic for 230 years, there has never been allowed a single Black person to occupy that position. So that broke the mold, and that was the only reason to comment about him. But otherwise, he was more reactionary, if it's possible, than Bush. Absolutely. I'm prepared to have a discussion on that, not because I'm a supporter of Bush. I think he was another disgusting person. But then after Abraham Lincoln, who was the American president who wasn't disgusting?
Okay, so next I'm on the stack as well, but Steve Zeltzer, you go ahead and you have 2 minutes, please. Keep it to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that looking at the role of inter-imperialist rivalry that we have globally, it's important to look at the role of China at this point, which is the major exporter of capital in the world, public and private. And as I put up in the chat, Chinese have taken over all the marble mines and the uranium mines in Namibia and are actively engaged in crushing the unions, the working class. They're bringing in Chinese workers to replace Namibian workers. So this framework, capitalist framework, the Chinese are fully involved in. The WTO, they're part of APEC. And during the APEC rally or conference in San Francisco, there were protests against it by people from the Philippines and other places. China, no mention of those protests against the role of APEC, which is an imperialist, capitalist trade organization. BRICS as well has Modi and the UAE in it. So it's an alliance with capitalist countries, with capitalist countries that want to be imperialist. So I don't think that has anything to do with socialism. And certainly Lenin was not interested in capitalist alliances with capitalist organizations, economic organizations. And I have a question about your support, wholehearted support for Stalin. Stalin supported the British control of India. He supported the formation of Israel, Zionist Israel, which was not a revolutionary position. And, Lenin's position was turn the imperialist war into a civil war and for the workers to take power. Globally now, workers are fighting Chinese investments in Piraeus, in Greece, ports that they've taken over. Countries are in debt to them, and they're taking over property. They're taking over wealth. In Africa, a lot of their investments are towards export of natural resources, not for development of the industrial base of these countries. So I think you have to look at the actual economic role of China in export of capital, not just public but private capital, and its role on a global level. That does not mean you should not oppose the encirclement of China, that you should not oppose NATO and the shutdown of all US military bases. That's something that internationalists need to fight for.
Thank you, Steve. Please go ahead. Harpal.
Well, as far as my information is concerned, and I rely literally for most of that information, even on bourgeois journalists, they do not believe that that is what China does. Of course, there's a propaganda. The Chinese are trapping everybody into debt to China. Well, a lot of people don't pay Chinese debts. assets get confiscated, as they did in Libya, they don't send their army then to protect their assets. They simply, having spent billions of dollars in Libya, they walked away when their property was taken over. So I do not believe that the Chinese behave in any imperialist way. Of course, Chinese do trade. Chinese are not a charitable organization. They when they buy assets abroad, they do expect to get some return. But all the same, what they get is far less than what would be got by imperialist countries in those areas. And I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The people of those countries, with one or two exceptions, actually welcome Chinese involvement. They're very happy with what China does in those countries, and they're equally happy with Russia. You see in various places recently where there have been change of governments through armed forces, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, etc. And there are demonstrations against Western imperialism, and a lot of people are carrying Russian flags there, not because they consider Russia as an imperialist country, because they think it's a friendly country that helps them, and I think it does help them. So if you disagree with it, then I think we have to agree to disagree. That's just, I mean, you're perfectly entitled to disagree with me. I'm not some oracle that people have to agree with me. As far as Stalin is concerned, you said, what did you say? The two charges that you made was that
he supported India's colonization by Britain and Israel.
No, he did not support India's colonization. I can give you chapter and verse of how he opposed Britain's rule in India. As far as the question of Israel is concerned, that is certainly a very murky affair. And if Stalin did support that, I think it was a total mistake. And it would have been guided by basically two factors. One, the Jews had been so badly treated and exterminated that he thought that people in Palestine could live together, Jews and Arabs together, and there should be a single state. But of course, the Americans had a lot more influence in the United Nations. They went for partition, and the partition took place. The second reason was the Zionists, those days, claimed to be socialists. And at that time, it was not American imperialism that was the most dominant, it was British imperialism. And there was a calculation in Moscow that the establishment of that state would help to expel British colonialism from the Middle East. Now, it hasn't turned out that way, and you can say it's a mistake, but as far as treachery is concerned, I'm not prepared to go as far as that. Stalin, all his life, didn't consider Jews to be a nation, and they still are not a nation. They come from different countries, and people who say Jews are a nation and they belong to Palestine, I think they're racist, they're anti-Semitic. They're trying to say they don't belong to Paris, Berlin, London, Washington or New York, that they should go to Palestine. That's where the Nazis believed Jews don't belong to Germany, and by extension, they don't belong to Europe. And the Zionists said, yes, that is true. We don't belong here. Weizmann, who was the first president of the State of Israel, he went to the Versailles Conference and made a speech. He said, the Jews don't have a problem. Jews are the problem. They are in that position because they don't have a state of their own, and they must go. And in order to create that state, actually, the Zionist agency was responsible for the murder of literally 1 million Hungarian Jews who were sent to concentration camps because the Zionist agency's agent, Rudolf Kastner, I think was his name, actually collaborated with Eichmann to send them, and they quietly boarded the trains when they were told that they were going on a holiday to a holiday resort, but they were being sent to concentration camps. So you can criticize Stalin if you like on the question of Israel, but it's not a very simple affair that Stalin wanted to actually somehow do the Arabs down and impose the Jews on them. most of the Jews even didn't want to go to Israel. They wanted to go to America. They wanted to go to Europe. They closed their doors so that they could be pushed in the direction of Palestine, because they had a plan to turn Israel into a bastion of imperialism against what they call a sea of hostile Arabism.
Okay, so I'm going to be the next one. Give myself that point. So I've read your book in the last chapters of the book. You've shown how socialist development basically was around 9% the period of Mao, all the way to 78 average. And then if you took out a couple of years, which you mentioned, and then afterwards is about 9.5%. So really the growth in Chinese development, economic development, is not all that different. The negatives are much bigger. Creating a class society, while Mao's revolution was going towards reducing class differences, it is sharpened. Secondly, I think it has set back tremendously. This revisionism in China has set back the working class movements, is demoralized, just like Khrushchev and then fall of Soviet Union has done. So these two losses, it seems to me, more than offset whatever the gains China may have. And third question is, what is the basis of your faith that they can return to socialist path and remove the market, having a large, even I don't know, they have a large enough government-owned, state industry. But Marx has argued you could have the entire thing state industry. That doesn't qualify as socialism. It is the relations of production. And so therefore, my question to you is, what makes, but I agree with you, China cannot be put in the same category as G7 countries, okay, who are militaristic, who are dominating, their aggression is in their blood, China has not acted. So I agree that China is not the same. But what makes you think that it can return to socialism in a genuine sense, the way you describe it? And I agree with you that that's what socialism is. So please address that. Thank you.
It's not my faith that China will return to the socialist planned economy. It's my hope that it will do so. But of course, hopes are not the same thing as reality. I very much hope they will do. And I think what actually makes it a bit more likely is that they have been under pressure for the last 10 years from imperialism. And the only way they can protect themselves is by being self-reliant, is by developing socialist economy. They have a state sector and the relation of production. You're quite right. It can be all owned by the state, and still the relation of production can be that of exploitation. And in China, because the whole economy is run on market basis, even the state-owned industry is run on that principle. Under socialism, market is not the regulator of production. Production is carried on for the benefit of the people. If you make market the regulation, then everything is determined by profitability. Those enterprises which are not profitable have to be closed down. And you produce only that which brings the maximum of profits. For a certain period of time, it kept on happening. But the Chinese have realized over a period of last 10, 15 years that this cannot carry on. So hence the Made in China policy, hence the Belt and Road Initiative, which has annoyed America very much. They were already sanctioning China, but they become even more fierce in sanctioning China. And in this way, they're forcing the Chinese to produce things that they might have delayed for a certain period of time. Just as in Russia, the American and Western European imperialist sanctions have made Russia's economy more resilient than it was before these sanctions. So to use Mao's famous words, imperialists are reactionaries. They lift a rock to drop it on their own feet. So they're dropping it on their own feet. By a different approach, they might have carried along on the old lines, but I think old lines are not going to return. The bonhomie between America and China, and the bonhomie between Russia and China and America is not going to return. That's my view.
Okay,
So
thank
sorry,
you.
what other question did you ask? I'm sorry.
Well, I think you answered it. I'm just thinking that the harm that it has done to socialist movement,
Oh yes,
the demoralization of the working classes.
It is something, first of all, the collapse of the Soviet Union had a demoralizing effect on the working class movement internationally. And then came on top of that, the adoption of market mechanisms in China, so that people said, well, if market is the answer, what's the point of going through the trouble of having socialist revolutions? Millions of people have lost their lives trying to get socialist revolutions. And if at the end of the day, all you can say is, we want market, well, you could have had the market without that. So it did have a demoralizing effect. But I think the world is now beginning to recover from it. One thing that has happened is nobody now simply takes the word of these big powers for what they are. They make an independent analysis. They make a judgment as to what they should be supporting. For a lot of communists now, they've been forced to use their heads, not for sporting a hat, fashionable or not, but for thinking, which is what head is meant for. And they're beginning to think, and they're beginning to explore. And I mean, my party is very small, but we're constantly trying to bring the science of Marxism to the advanced workers. And we're having some success. That's why being small hasn't prevented the authorities and the police from arresting our comrades for doing nothing more than selling literature.
Okay, our time is actually over, but I think we'll go for the last question with Sheila Hamanaka. And Rich Johnson also has raised hands. Let's go through these two questions if you don't mind staying a little bit longer. I know it's past 2 o'clock for you. Okay, Sheila, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. I find it kind of fascinating that in both Russia and China, that we now have 3 or 4 or 5 generations that have been raised or presumably have read the work of Karl Marx and other socialists, works about class struggle, socialism, and communism. So I always feel like there has to be some just like in the United States, there's the myth of democracy, and there's people who still believe that there should be justice, and they're outraged that there isn't because they see that there isn't. So my question is, in the younger generations in China, and if you know, in Russia, is there a resurgence of a truly revolutionary movement that sees through all the class contradictions in their own countries?
In China, it has never stopped being so. There was a lot of opposition to the reforms and continues to be so. The Chinese Communist Party is not a monolithic in the sense that everybody is in favor of market reforms. Notwithstanding my views, I have to give credit to the Chinese Communist Party. I get invited to China. I don't go these days anywhere because I have serious mobility problems, and it's no point going there if I need 3 people to support my very existence there. That's not helping socialism. It's just obstructing people from doing whatever they were supposed to be doing at these conferences. And I say it openly that, they talk about constantly corruption. And I say, comrades, corruption is not a problem. Corruption is a symptom of the fact that you've introduced a market economy. Market economy is bound to produce corruption. You can hang as many of them as you like, and yet the opportunity will not be wasted by crooks who want to use the market for profiting and benefiting themselves. And one comrade from Australia said to me, "You're amazing. You come here, you're invited by the Chinese, and you say these things." I said, "Look, they paid for my fares. They give me 5-star treatment. I'm fed from morning to evening till I can eat no more. And if I can't even speak truth to them, I'm not a comrade of theirs, I'm an enemy of theirs. I don't want to say things please their ears. I want to say things which I believe are correct. They can take them or leave them. So that's been my position. So in China, the opposition has never stopped. In the Soviet Union, they had over a long period of time literally hollowed out the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Can you believe there are 20 million members of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union at the time of collapse? And useless drunkards like Yeltsin could impose themselves with imperialist help. If 2,000 communists, dedicated communists had come, they could have with their bare hands strangled Yeltsin and his supporters. But that didn't happen because they were demoralized. This is again the point with which I start my very brief presentation today, namely the chief endeavor of the bourgeoisie is to actually instill in the working class the lack of faith in its own abilities. And so they had lost the faith in their own abilities. They had been so taught under the reformist regimes of Khrushchev and his successors. So I really am not an expert on present-day Russia. I'm an expert on the old Soviet Union. If I am an expert at all, and that's up to you to judge. But I knew a lot about the old Soviet Union. In fact, that's the only socialist country whose economy I was well aware of and whose politics I was well aware of. I was well aware of various factions that fought against each other in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. But I'm not so well versed in what takes place elsewhere these days. But I do know a lot of Chinese communists oppose the market reforms and continue to do so even now. I've got a chapter in my book which says opposition to market reforms. So there's a hint of that. I am not able to give everything because I don't read Chinese. Not every bit of literature is translated in English. And also, the Chinese fight internal battles very much in private meetings, if you like. There's no open source from it you can find. For example, in the Soviet Union, when there was a disputation in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union between Lenin on one hand and Trotsky and Bukharin on the other, or later on between Stalin on one hand and Bukharin and Trotsky and Zinoviev and Kamenev, you knew what each party was saying, which I don't know the same about China, and I admit it freely. So you might say, well, why did you write the book if you don't know it? Well, that's the card life has dealt me.
Okay, thank you. Now, last question,
if I
and then
may,
we close it.
I
have to
I
go
hope
to
that
pictures.
the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, comes back on the air with the internet, with the African People's Socialist Party, that are both small parties under vicious attack currently by the U.S. government and Great Britain.
Sheila, thank you. Rich Johnson is the last one, and then we have to close it. We've gone way beyond time. Sorry. Rich, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to try to make this a short question. I think it's a very big potential answer or whatever, but maybe it's simple. So when I look at China, and we talked briefly about all the advances and all the development of productive forces, although largely now controlled by bourgeois forces and capitalist methods. But my question is, if so many of the Chinese in 1949 and even after that, during Mao, were living out on the, what do you call it, were essentially peasants, if what we or the socialists should or are asking for is that the Chinese skip capitalism and go from peasant to peasant economy to a socialist economy, I don't see that. So what I'm saying is that I think the phase they're going through where they're using so much, which we're all aware of, more or less, becoming more aware all the time of how much power that the bourgeois, you named how many billionaires, I think, many billionaires in China. Okay, well, that's unsettling for sure, but I don't see that we can skip.
Okay. Let him answer
skip
the question.
Yeah,
Let him answer
okay,
the
so
question
I
because
think
we're
it's
really
clear.
over.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, my view is the same as Lenin's. What distinguishes the socialist from a bourgeois revolution is the state of preparedness of the masses. And if the masses are prepared to go over to the next stage and establish socialist society, somebody asked the question, and this the Kautskyites were always saying, Russia doesn't have a big enough proletariat to have socialism. So Lenin's answer was, I think it was an answer to somebody called Boris Soberan. He asked that question. He said, where, in what text of Marx is it written that it can't be the other way around, that the proletariat comes to power and develops socialist industry in the proletariat? And that's precisely what went on to take place in Soviet Russia. And nobody would have said in 1960 that the proletariat should not have taken power because the proletariat was too small at the time. You know, it did take place. It was always, and please don't think I'm having a go at you, because I'm no interest in entering into a personal fight between you and me. And it was a Trotskyite and social democratic in the new sense of the word, not the old social democracy, which was Marxist in its origins, that proletariat should not take power until it is the majority of the population. And Lenin said, well, that was nothing but treachery against socialism. The opportunity to take power should not be wasted, and the proletariat should then go on to develop the productive forces as quickly as possible and bring socialism. That's my view, and it's not an original view. I'm really not an original thinker. I am a regurgitator of Leninism. So that's my position. And if I regurgitate him badly, that's not Lenin's fault, it's my fault.
Thank
Let
you.
me just
Thank
say
you.
this
No,
one line.
sorry. We got to close the program.
One line.
Thank you
Come
very
on.
much. No, sorry. I'm sorry. You can send an email to him, ask the question. Thank you, Comrade Harpal Brar. You'll have to come back again because we want to talk to you about Soviet history too. So thank you very much for staying up late. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
I'll give you email contact for Comrade Brar for Norma, please. Thank you. I'm going to end the Alan.
And next week is Slava from Ukraine, which is going to be a really interesting session. You're going to hear such stuff that you haven't heard before. So
Stop
come
the
back.
recording now and let's
Yeah.
end the session.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harpal. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades.
Good night to you.
Good night.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com. And the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.